And real quick, we are talking about decentralized marketplaces, and it's something we got into towards the second half of the call last week. And for those of you who haven't seen this long Lumio thread between Lynn, Posby, and me about implementing some of these decentralized marketplaces. I like to use the word bazaars as compared to markets because for me, like markets tend to be more globalized, whereas bazaars are more embedded within the community, which basically means you have to be part of a community in order to access the bazaar, which I think is a very counterintuitive, countercultural move away from global markets, right? And so we were talking about some of these design implementations, and I think they're interesting. I'll just pull it up. Or if you check out the forum thread, there's a few points that I listed out. We can talk about the considerations for the front, for the UI, and some of the issues that we talked about is, well, if you're, are you viewing each bazaar or marketplace within the community you're in? So when you're within a community, you see all these offers streaming through. But then is there also a consolidated place where you see all your offers and trades across all communities? And so what would the UI considerations for that be? And Posby's been doing some amount of thinking for that. So Posby, maybe you can get into it. And then there's also conversations around building membranes for marketplaces, and what are those membranes? Are they reputational? Are they, some other form? And then price matching, because if one of the problems with distributed exchanges has been like coordination of offers and prices. Like over the last couple of decades, we've seen this aggregation towards just one exchange pretty much for each country. Like you have one massive stock market exchange, because coordination of price to each exchange has been really tough. But that gets flipped around with agent-centric technology, because offers can be issued from one place that the agent controls and then can move to different membranes, and before trades close there can be some kind of coordination. But why do we want to do that? Because let's say I'm part of a community that I'm deeply embedded with. I might want to offer it as a gift, but let's say to another community I want to be more sharky and offer a tougher price. Maybe for another community that I volunteer with, I want to offer a 30% discount. So that allows me to make differential offers. So those are the three themes. Pospi, do you want to get into the UI perspective of this?
I kind of feel like I need more. I need to narrow in more on which part of the UI. Yeah.
I think that individual view versus the collective view might be the right place to start. What do you think?
Yeah.
Or even more specific.
Yeah, no, we can do that. I think we talked a little bit last week about what some of the features of an intersubjective UI, I think is the phrase I'm using at the moment, might look like. Like, when you click on that little thing in the top right of your browser and it's got that customize button that lets you drag stuff around in the toolbars, like that's kind of the basic paradigm that I'm thinking about it being. But it's kind of, there's stuff in there that's needed to do that Holochain doesn't really have a protocol for or do yet. And I know folks in the community have thought about it in the past. I had some conversations with Nathan Waters way back in the early days talking about a whole bunch of crazy ideas about, what if we put UI components in the DNA and then you can inflate them dynamically from Holochain and just have the data in the UI emerge as it needs to and stuff. And that's one use case of that, but it almost seems like we are getting to the point where we need a delivery mechanism for UI components as well as UI apps that come with some set of modules. So say, in the case of a marketplace app, there's a bunch of DNAs that are needed to service the data functionality for the marketplace. There's also the user interface for the marketplace app. but we probably also want to offer as part of that DNA, and you do it through the UI layer, just having some JavaScript file at a predefined location that you can access, which is actually the same as how the conductor data gets sniffed anyway at the moment. So that's a pattern that's been established. But then basically putting JavaScript modules in there that offer, I would expect, web components because they're standard enough to be used in any old framework. And then just being able to kind of pull those out into another app so that something else that doesn't have a marketplace but wants to embed marketplace can allow users to go customize and pull in that set of components because they have that other app installed and so they can find it. And then being able to, drag and drop and configure where they go. So yeah, there's then.
Could you just explain that use case a bit? Because I don't think I did that enough.
Well, that one's not as interesting as if you think about the reverse. So not the marketplace as being the thing that you want to embed, but say there's someone makes a holochain app. I mean, you've got that likes module as part of the reputation modules you're building. So say that there's a DNA and an application that comes with that like module, so you can just view all the things you've liked, and maybe you can view things that other people have liked, and that's kind of like the admin level interface that you use. But then with that would also be packaged some components, and maybe one of them's a little widget that says like this post, and maybe the other one's a little widget that says 5 of your friends have liked this, and 10, 100,000 other people. So then just by the fact of you having that likes module installed in your conductor, the marketplace is able to pick up, oh yeah, those components exist, here's the source files from them, and then I can pull into the marketplace a little widget that says that this listing on the marketplace has been liked by X number of people, and stick it in the marketplace without needing any coding skills to be able to do that. Is kind of the key thing. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say about it other than that. It's kind of I think we're at a point in our thinking with holochain apps now where we not only need to be thinking about the apps themselves, but thinking about like what are the little pieces of those apps that become useful in other apps, and how do those transfer across.
And I guess a conversation here that might also be useful is how you're thinking about like a generic marketplace app that can provide that basic infrastructure, like what the components of that would be. Like let's say we're talking about a marketplace app that can just get cloned and cloned and cloned, not by every community that wants to use a marketplace, but what we're just talking about is like the common infrastructure, right? Like what would every community pretty much need?
Yeah, which is a good question that I have no answer for. It depends on what the community needs, right?
I'm guessing it would be like the basic REA suite of modules, right? Like those things would be.
I think there'll be some of them, but it's less about what does the marketplace offer and more about what spaces for customizability does the marketplace offer.
That's a good point.
And so it's sort of, like the obvious one is, okay, you want some configuration around a person and some configuration around where those people might show up in the marketplace. So maybe there's a context for that person as, a little avatar in their name next to a listing that they've put on the marketplace. So then should that be a customizable little slot that you can stick in other metadata about that person for display there, so that whenever you're looking at a marketplace, you can see that information in the marketplace. And some of the ones that come to mind are like the low-hanging fruit of maybe there are specific holochain networks you're in that have meaning to you, so you can show a little badge next to people that are also in those networks, so that this person on the marketplace is also in my collectives network, or is in SeedShare or whatever they're doing. Network commonality, I think, is maybe another one, like just how many networks do you have in common with someone can be an indicator of trust. But yeah, then it's things that get more opinionated fairly quickly, like what about showing all of the commitments that that person has made across all of the economic spaces that you share with them, and whether they follow through on those commitments? Like,
Mm,
then you can get a sense of whether that person is reliable, but is that giving that person a fair chance on being reliable and changing their behavior, and, you know, allowing for bad days they've had and all that kind of stuff?
yeah, though technically it is information that you have received in the past, right? So you're free to make that judgment.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Um, and we've also talked a little bit about what Sacred Capital's plans are with the Reputation Vault,
mm,
and that comes into a lot of this too, because I've been thinking of it as sort of a dashboard for, from technical standpoint, a dashboard for authoring MapReduce queries, really. Like, it's a place where you do all the analysis on the data you have and wire up data sources and
mm,
things. And that much seems like it's, we both agree that's core functionality that's absolutely
mm,
necessary.
mm,
But then does the Reputation Vault offer a series of widgets that you can pull into other apps that allow you to display that information in aggregate form as little badges or ratings and
mm.
stuff like that? Or is that, you know, that may
Is
be
that
the
left to the
future
app? Yeah.
goal? And maybe, you know, you just do that in the Reputation Vault for now, and you just context switch into that and make some calculations
Mm,
to get a sense of what you're about to do, and then you switch back to the marketplace to make it happen. So you
mm,
kind of, there's no visual context there, but you can deal with it by
yeah.
creating your own mental context and jumping between the two.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, I guess, a good way to frame up a, a framework for deciding this could be how we model this in reality, right? Like when you show up in a collective context, like let's say I've showed up at Lynn's dinner party. Lynn, the fact that she's hosting it means she is imposing some kind of culture for the collective. Like she thinks this is the way people should meet. Maybe she set the room in such a way that we're all facing each other. Maybe she decides to give Posby the chance to speak first. I don't know, like different kinds of games that Lynn could be playing with us, right? But I'm saying there's some merit in honoring that, because I go to a collective because I like the way that the collective has articulated that culture. And so similarly, like if I show up in a collective like Lynn's collective and there's a marketplace there, Lynn's kind of saying like, hey, these are the people I trust, and so this is the order in which their posts or offers should be sorted. And I think you honor the collective in that sense. But at the same time, like you might be at Lynn's party, but you also know Sid is an idiot because I met him in 5 other instances and this is what he said to me. And so I think that's like that balance of also holding that individual. Now the question is, where do you view your individual assessment? I think that should land on your personal dashboard. Um, and maybe the reputation vault is that, or maybe like a own like a special Bazaars app is where you see market related information. Um, and maybe when you do hover inside a community, like you do see a pop-up which says like, here's some more additional information on that person. But it may, but I kind of like the idea of honoring that app's articulation of what is important as well. Like I think that's what the app is for. Like that's why I'm going to it, right? Does that make sense?
Hmm.
And so, for
It
example,
might
if
be
I were,
both. It might be
yeah, it might
both.
be
I
both. I
mean, a
think just,
community has its governance and its,
mm,
what you're calling culture.
mm,
Um, you have your preferences personally too. Maybe you can override some things visually or whatever.
mm.
Um, I don't know.
Yeah, and I
Sounds
think the
like there
question
might
is
be.
like just how we interpret. Like it's almost like you want to give people that option. So let's say I see Lynn's offer, like let's say I see Posby's offer in Lynn's marketplace. Like the ordering and sorting might be, what Lynn suggests. But when I click through on Posby, like I actually do have the option to see what his avatar is about and what my view of Posby is. Like I don't know, that made that. Like, I think it can be both, like you said, but I think the question is, how do you build that interplay? Like, where do I see both? Like, it might be too chaotic to see it all within Lynn's community, but maybe if there's a pop-up, it makes things a little simpler.
Mm.
Is there any notion of like kind of nesting of communities and groups, like some sort of like fractally-ish thing where there's, I guess you're talking about this like maybe specific context, but then you might have a bigger context you're in, and so you would relate through the specific in a different way, maybe because there's, I don't know, another level. I guess I'm kind of like grasping at
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I think,
there's lots of groups that structure themselves that way, you know. There's an overarching network, and then maybe there's a bunch of projects, or, you know, or maybe there's geographic nodes that are all part of some broader organizational structure. And, you know, I mean, so that I think we want the ultimate flexibility there, and, you know, because there's a lot of configurations out there.
Yeah,
I mean, the Holochain Hackalong group is a perfect example, right? Like, we're nested within the Holochain culture in a way.
I do think it's more complicated than just nested as well. Like, it's not a total set subset. It's like things could be partially nested and extending outside of a thing that they're kind of subordinate to in a way. So yeah, once you get to organizations having private collaboration spaces that are actually collaborations between organizations, then it starts to break down from that hierarchical model to a netarchical thing.
Yep. Totally.
Yeah. To some of Sid's points, I think for sure we want like a community to have a default cultural articulation, and you know, I think there might even be some ways within tools that the Holo team builds natively that you might be able to assess that. Someone shared the insight a while ago. I think it might have been Gene Russell saying that when people are in the HAP store in Holochain, they're not actually looking for HAPs. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking for people like them is kind of the thing they're searching for, because there might be, you know, 100 different communities all using the same HAP, and it's then which community do you choose? So by view of which DNAs are present in each community, it tells you something about the culture they've chosen just by the types of data that they're dealing with, which is kind of interesting. But I still think for the goals that we're reaching for, we want the ability to step outside it. Like, you want to be able to have that diversity where I'm in Lynn's community, and I like most of what Lynn does, but there's this one thing that I just can't abide, so I'm going to pull in some other data to see it differently in my little way. And I don't think it should necessarily be communicated to Lynn that that's happened without your consent, because maybe you're in an organization that doesn't want you to look at something and you've chosen to as a, I don't know, there's lots of complicated factors, isn't there? But I also think, you know, you still want the facility to be able to publish and share those configurations, because there is the possibility that you then alter something and Lynn says that's great, and then the whole community adapts and changes to the new configuration. And I think that should be encouraged as well.
So can I back up to a question, or go ahead, Sid, if you're going to.
Just a closing thought.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a closing thought. Maybe we also just leave it to the community. Like, maybe they want a more liberal, like, fine, I'm throwing a dinner party, but you're free to talk to whoever you want to talk to based on, you know, your fabric. Or you might be more authoritarian and say, no, we're all going to sit on the dining table and speak in this order. And I guess that has merit as well. Yeah.
I mean, it works, and the only difference is whether the user interface you provide enables the kind of customization we're talking about or not. Like, if it doesn't, then effectively you have a single view of things that's imposed by an engineering team that everybody in that community uses. And if you don't, then, you know, people can pick and choose and shift a bit. Where was I going with that? Yeah, I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
I think you're saying it work. Yeah. I think Maybe you're trying to say like it shouldn't be defined by the engineering, is what you're trying to say? No.
No, more actually, no, the point is that even when it is defined by the engineering, like you can still go outside the room, you know, like you don't have to be in that collaboration space and stuck to it.
Yeah.
You can go look at it in the reputation vault along with other data and make your own subjective judgments and then come back. And that's the thing I think that people will do most often as a default. But the question for me is, you know, how do we make that more seamless so that you don't have to do that kind of, you know, it's like we want to get to a place where everything's integrated. We don't want to be thinking about app silos still and going, okay, I'm doing email now. I need to stop and do reputation, and then I need to go and do some budgeting kind of thing.
Yeah, that's going to be a big shift. So I think it's challenging. Maybe we catch a few specific groups and try to work through it with people who are trying to do something like that.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see where the Holo team's core app suite ends up when they launch it, because, you know, even things like we had HoloGit back in the day, and I don't know if anyone's actually recoded that for the new version, but a Git interface for me, as someone that works with the Git interface all the time, feels like a thing that I can think of a lot of little reputational indicators that might be useful to see in that context of how many pull requests this person put in, and
what kind of projects.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember that site. There was some site I sent you a while ago said it was like a developer reputation thing that was done from pulling up GitHub, and it was like a specific, you know, a specific reputational calculation that they'd built a whole website around. But it was just kind of interesting seeing the ways
that would
people
be cool.
are thinking about aggregating that.
So Posby, do you have any, or anybody, do you have any sense of where Holochain itself is going with this kind of thought process, if anywhere? You know,
I do not. Do you see it?
My sense is that we have to develop this thought process ourselves.
Okay.
And we pretty much forge it, yeah.
Yeah, I think the two people mostly holding for these kind of patterns is Eric Harris Braun and Nicholas Luck are kind of the two. I mean, if you look up Holochain Reinventing Organizations, that article that Nico penned in like 2018 is still kind of relevant to all this stuff. But yeah, I think it needs to become more a part of like the core Holochain community, and Sid and Eric there have been talking about that recently, I think, about having some dedicated spaces in the forum for that. And I know Alban has requested to join our Lumio group, but I think some of like the forum is maybe a better place for a lot of these technical conversations, because they are more community driven and more about how do we integrate with other projects than they are about our own decisions.
Yeah.
Alban, were you trying to say something here?
Yes, I'm always trying to pick what I'm trying to say. It's like that's a harder process for me. And not having a lot of experience talking, it's not so easy for me. I just wanted, like, sort of my observation is this on this one is I'm curious how, regardless of the possibilities that people can have technically, are people actually capable of choosing the best decisions that they need to choose? So how intentionally they're choosing particular scenarios, and I feel like we're assuming that they always have in a very sort of intentional choice every time, and I feel like that's also I don't think it happens very much. So this was just one observation, but what I wanted to say more particularly was some of the tools that we're trying to build. A few of them do actually have a marketplace. We haven't really thought that much. So one of them would be this Uber-like, the other one would be Airbnb-like, the other one would be sort of a cloud sharing something. So we always imagine to write, for example, one Uber-like application and we refer to it as our transport. So I'll refer to it as our transport and not Uber, because it's kind of, I don't really like Uber very much. So, and there's some people that already done it as well. There's Ride Austin that has done it in Austin, Texas. But we're trying to build one so any city anywhere can actually use it. And this is where the topic kind of relates with this conversation. Not every city wants to use the exact same application. They have different kind of regulations. Someone maybe wants to add a tax in it. Someone maybe wants to add different kind of licenses, different kind of insurance policies. So this is in the level that I thought, that we thought how we would design the marketplace. But now that from this conversation, I'm thinking how much you can break into, how much small modules that you can break it into to actually compile our Airbnb type of applications and then our transport type of application, all different markets. So I don't know what's the possibility of fractal in this process.
Yeah, I totally agree with your point. I think we're in a community where, because of the nature of the technology, there are more groups than normal thinking about how do you do this hypermodular cross-app kind of integration stuff, but it's totally not the normal way of thinking. And there are going to be a lot of just normal everyday apps on Holochain that work like fairly standard apps. So in those cases, you know, it's just kind of like the easy version. Like, you don't need to go and build all this customizability, and you just, you know, the development team works with the core frameworks and they build whatever app they want around it with whatever particular taxes and other pieces that they need to articulate. Because yeah, I think like those kinds of ones where you're talking about in municipality and things, they are going to be fairly static. They don't want people tweaking those things too much, I would say. But I give it 5 years at the same time.
Just really
Yeah,
quickly on that, I think that intentionality might also vary on the basis of what those decisions are, right? Like, for me, picking a taxi isn't that intentional, but whose home I go to eat might be really, really important to me. Like, I'm maybe because like I'm very picky about my food habits. But for example, if you're someone in a vulnerable, like a minority or vulnerable in a community, you might be very particular about which rideshare you pick and less picky about your food. And so maybe you don't want to exercise your intentionality in that. So I think it varies. And I also think like agent centricity will allow us to do a lot more intimate activities that the internet didn't allow. Like meeting people more often in your neighborhood. Like, you wouldn't meet anyone just off the internet. But the agent centricity might allow more of that, like hosting people, living with them, meeting them, doing projects together. And I think for some of that, intentionality might be useful. But that's, yeah. So all I'm saying is we don't know that entirely yet. Sorry, Paspi, I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. I think I'm kind of complete on that topic, actually. There's maybe some Alban, yeah.
I don't quite understand what's the marketplace with examples like someone going to eat in someone's dinner. Like, that's how is that a marketplace? Or how is, I think it's, or the way I perceive marketplace, it's most of the time beyond the individual, beyond the social context, sort of not something that lacks the trust.
Yeah. So I think that's I think a fascinating discussion, because
this is a good segue.
Yeah, that is a good. When we're talking about, you could say bazaars, and I think the key differentiation there is bazaars is like commerce, but that's very highly integrated in social fabric. Like, it's not removed from social fabric. So one of the examples, like I mentioned food, because there's this one group of people in central India that are trying to figured out a way in which some of the younger people living by themselves can actually eat at the homes of people who like to cook, and not like once a month, chef style cooking, but on a daily basis. So instead of eating out every day, you're actually going into someone's home. And if we think about, that's so intimate, right? Like hygiene and food quality and food style and like who this person is, like all of that is so yucky and so messy. But it is a kind of commerce, but I would say it's like a highly intimate kind of commerce. And so that to me would be an example of a bazaar. Like that's something where the bazaar plays a very important role. Yeah.
Don't you think we actually have to support a whole range of
Yeah.
that kind of thing? There'll be
Yeah.
stuff with very firm boundaries, mutual credit
Mm,
systems maybe where people have agreed. I mean, this isn't as intimate as what you're talking about, Sid, but
mm,
where there's a fair amount of governance. And then there's just going to be, if you think about a ride share, you need a certain quantity, you need
yeah. Yeah.
a certain openness to make it really work, some kinds of things.
Yeah.
So
And
I
I
don't
and
know.
I guess
I
the
think,
social fabric bar is present, but it's low, right? Like you can't be an absolute idiot and participate in rideshare. Like there is some filter, and I think
oh
that's
yeah, there's some filter, but in terms
uh,
of membrane, it's,
yeah. But I think like that's what would be nice to introduce, right? Like let's say you have a rideshare system where you have to be part of a community in order to even register as a driver, and that would immediately give the riders so much of a sense of security when they hop in, right? Like it's not nobody. And so it's not intimate at all, but there's some kind of membrane, which would be like a basic binary membrane that someone needs to hop over. I can think of like with Basin and Shiro, like some of the biodigester and agricultural communities, you might want to have a simple membrane of, hey, you have to be part of one of these organic communities in order to have access to a produce, like something as simple as that. Because if not, like we were talking last time, right? Like Wall Street would just march in with an algorithm and sweep through everything that was priced even slightly cheaper, right? And so you might want to create a simple membrane for that. Um, so yeah.
yeah, those examples both need, I mean, those are going to be people who choose to work with each other.
Mm. Yeah, but what I'm saying that the membrane is very small, but it's present, right? Like you have to be maybe a member of any organic community in the world in order to even see this offer. Like that's
Mhm.
as non-intimate as it can be, but it plays some role in weeding out like complete price demolition in a way.
Is is there also, when you said this thing about like in order to join the big network, you have to be part of a smaller network, kind of reminded me of this, I don't know, fractally thing, although possibly pointed out
Mm.
maybe it's not like strictly
Mm.
sub nesting, it's like this weird interactive graphy thing. Yeah. Um, but like, I guess if I want someone to come over to my house, I don't need to be in the same, necessarily in the same specific community as them, but I want to know that they're in somebody's community and that my community has like a relationship with theirs. So there's like
Yeah.
this higher level weird, like
Yeah.
I'm in a thing and that thing relates to their thing, and then inside of that they're related to, and so someone like knows who they are, something like that. So the membrane's
Yeah,
like weirdly heterogeneous or something.
yeah, and it's kind of weirdly human as well for this kind of stuff, because like the words that you're saying are actually the same as the technical requirements. Like in order for this network to know that you're a member of another network, they have to already know someone from that network and have a trust relationship established with them, because who else is going to verify except for someone in that community, you know?
Yeah, sure.
So there's this way that you kind of have to ask for reputational information across the bridge of other people when they're external to a network to check that things are, and so you have to have that trust built in. there's also something quite interesting in all this, which isn't a thing that has to be dealt with in the real world. That's kind of new, because in the real world, if you're going to, I'll use the word bazaar. It's kind of an Eastern word, right? Like, I don't think we really have bazaars in the West. Maybe the
Farmers
appropriate
markets,
Western
maybe.
term is like farmer's market or
Yeah,
something. I don't
yeah.
know. Yeah. But like if you want to do something in the real world in a marketplace, you're always kind of physically or mentally located in that marketplace if you're ringing someone up, say. But you know, it's like you go to the bazaar and it's on this street corner, and there's this social context that happens there. But in these spaces, we also have the addition of kind of like a virtual bazaar, where it's me stepping outside of a particular context and saying, I want to look at like all these marketplaces that I'm across who are all selling produce, and I want to find the best produce in amongst all of that. So then there's this kind of virtual marketplace that only you are seeing, that only you are responsible for the cultural kind of articulation and the data you're seeing, but it's actually an aggregate of like all of the spaces you're connecting to. And I think potentially, I don't know if it's a good idea, but you could even do some stuff like, we were talking about Lynn's configuration for her collective before. And so if she's one of those marketplaces amongst the 5 that I'm now looking at, then you can just take that configuration for the UI and do like a set union of that and all of the other configurations from all the other people's UIs. And so automatically in my bazaar, I see all of the reputational data that's relevant in Lynn's context and in Bob's context and in Sid's context all together, which may well be like a total mess in the UI and kind of overwhelming and too much data. So these are going to be interesting constraints to think through, but it may also be that, you know, you author a kind of generic one based on the modules you've got installed globally, and that's what you see everywhere. Or yeah, it's and as someone pointed out today, you know, the degree to which we absolve people of the load of that initial configuration and make it easy for them is kind of going to heavily inform how much this gets adoption, because not a lot of users are going to sit there and configure like the whole display context for a marketplace just so they can view some stuff.
So I think like that should lie with the community leader, right? Like the power user, that person who's creating the community. Like they have all the incentive, they have that drive to say, this is what I want. And so I feel like that would also drive adoption, because they're not the passive types.
Yeah, I think that's the initial seed, but you don't want to make them an authority forever, kind of thing. Like everyone should be empowered to then step up and say, actually, I don't like their configuration, here's mine.
Yeah, and I guess it'll be in some way. You also, I'm okay with like leaving that to market forces, right? Like if their community starts needing more nuance, like then that power user starts building in that nuance to let them engage with each other more. But yeah, I guess we can figure that out. Like that'll.
I think there's going to be all kinds of governance in these, you know.
Yeah.
I don't picture a lot of one leader communities on this stuff personally, but you know.
Definitely for some of the more playful, maybe even virtual stuff, you won't have strong governance. Like it might be just groups of friends sharing content, who just, you know, don't mind, like it's more organic and playful, and you're not doing something community, like not as intentionally. Yeah, for that you definitely need to be light on governance. But yeah, that's
I just want to stress the point, because I'm not sure if we're saying the same thing, but it feels critical to me that every individual has the right to create their own context for any place they're in, and that they don't have to have someone else do that for them, because that in effect is like a core underpinning of called a dissensus protocol for that space. Like you need to have the facility that even with the
what's
best
the word you
governance,
said? What's the word you use?
Dissensus, not consensus. Yeah.
Is that a
so
word?
Like I mean, it's at least a word that someone in the Ethereum space made up once. But there's actually a blog post called Dissensus Protocols somewhere. I think it might have been a Vitalik one. And it's, you know, the question of like, is forking an actually empowered political act, or is this just this impotent thing where I can fork into my own chain that no one cares about? And here it seems like it is kind of a more empowered act, because if you fork the UI into something that only you're seeing, that's actually quite useful and powerful to you, and it's not beholden to anyone else. And I think that's important.
I guess framing it as everyone starts with like a consolidated view, and then as you want to build more complexity into it, you get the option to fork it as you go along.
Yeah.
Like, yes, I want to view people across all of my contexts, not just one. Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Do you literally have to fork it, or can you just configure it?
Oh, just configure,
Okay,
right?
just checking.
Yeah,
I was
that's what I
don't
thought.
know. Might be asking Possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking into this, and I think it makes a lot of sense for that configuration to be a holochain entry with its own content addressable hash, because then if you want to fork it and contribute that back to other people, you actually have to create a new separate record that says, I'm using this configuration, not this one. And it's easy for everyone else to find and use. So I think that's actually kind of a useful way, is like creating multiple configs rather than editing existing ones, sort of thing.
And would that allow this sort of like any individual can make a change and then it can get kind of shared to a broader group kind of like organically? Okay.
Yeah, because then it's just, is it a private entry that you're keeping for yourself, or is it a public entry you're sending to the DNA? Or is it potentially like you have a separate DNA that spans all of the marketplaces for configs that you can publish into, so that anybody in any marketplace can access it? Like it's just a question of how you deploy the networks to be able to do that.
Cool.
So it's, if I'm understanding right, the config is shared, but not necessarily the data that I view in it, right? Like, let's say I've seen,
right.
yeah, okay, that makes sense.
That seems, I kind of was reminded of this discussion earlier in the chat about like how intentional are individuals. And I guess this is a thing I wonder a bit about with, I guess, more recently, like thinking about like Linux and open source software tools that like kind of require significant upfront user investment to configure them. And it seems like there's, it's possible to get exhausted by having to do so much like individual, wrangling of stuff, and that maybe the individual only has so much like intention to devote. And a cool thing that seems to happen is like when there's sharing of these patterns among groups, and kind of like the collective can have strong intentionality and kind of like relieve the individual of having to like, be a John Wayne, like rugged individual sorting out everything for themselves. And I think it seems important to me that it can go like, that any individual can do it or can make the change. And then that can also get like brought back to the group and kind of built on and reintegrated.
Yeah, I think can is an important word with that, in the same way that when in Sacred Capital's design, like an important part of it is being able to have a reputational calculation that's private to you, that isn't shared by anyone. Because as soon as you start sharing those configs, you start exposing your worldview, and you start, potential, discussions and arguments with people about who's right and who's wrong. And the UI is the same. I think like it's just a different facet of that. The way that you configured to see things is kind of your own personal view, unless you want it known otherwise.
Yeah, interesting.
The thing is, like if I was share my own personal config, I don't even know that it would make sense to the others, because the DNAs that I'm part of are just unique to me, right?
I mean, there'll be, again, some weird intersection where a lot of them are common and some of them aren't. So if you're getting a different UI arrangement for all the DNAs that are standing in the collective, then probably everyone else in the collective is going to run all of them as well.
Yeah, maybe. Like, so I tend to think of these as lenses, right? So when you start off, there's a community lens, which is like, yes, this is all the data that we want to pull in, and here's the badges and scores that our lens generates. And then obviously each person's running their own lens. And so I could also say to the community, hey, I think my lens is cool, and you can borrow it if you think, you can also use it if you think it's relevant to you. So yeah, I guess that's a tangible way to frame what we just discussed. Yeah. I guess at some point we'll also get into like people designing these lenses, right? Like that'll be the math of things, like what makes a good host. And this is Michael's special secret mix of what makes a good host. And that could become, yeah, like the playlist of sorts, the Spotify playlist that gets shared around. Should we move on? We've got one more point that we could quickly touch on if we all feel complete with this discussion. Price matching, because I think this is a big one, and this is one of the reasons why exchanges across the world have been, like, over the last couple of decades, we've seen this aggregation towards just one large exchange in each country. And so the concern here is, if I'm making offers across multiple neighborhoods, if someone in one neighborhood comes up to me and tries to match it with a bid, how do we communicate it to all the other neighborhoods, and how do we prevent double spending of sorts? Yeah.
Yeah, my question on that for Lynn is what ways you usually see intents and commitments flow in these kinds of situations. Because that's something to highlight about the value flows model, is that your intention precedes your commitment to actually do the thing. So you've put an intention out to exchange something on a marketplace, and a paired trading partner on that marketplace, their response to you is going to be to send you a bunch of intents to say, yes, I want to do that thing and transfer the money. And then I think from that, it's probably up to you to say, yes, I'll go through with that and set up the commitments to actually make it happen. Is that usually what happens then? Does it kind of vary?
Well, my experience is much less with marketplaces, but I think it varies a lot. I mean, if you think, a lot of e-commerce is just like, here's my offering, take it or leave it, make an order, just put it in your cart, go pay, So it would range from that to, negotiation, whatever. There's all kind, I think it's the entire range, really.
Yeah, I wonder if we may need some metadata on proposal to be able to assess that.
I suspect that's part of the group or context, culture or rules, or,
Yeah, well,
I mean,
I don't know if
it may not totally be.
Yeah, I think it probably has to be per listing even, because there's some things where you're trying to sell something and just if someone has the money, then you sell it automatically.
Yeah,
But in that same
exactly.
marketplace,
Amazon.
you might be having some trades, and you might want to inspect the good that's being traded, being exchanged for the one you're selling before you commit. So
Oh yeah, totally.
it does feel like it needs to be a per listing thing. And
okay,
my other concern with it being external to value flows is that then all the apps have to request that metadata in order to mash the virtual marketplace together, which sounds difficult. So there's a few different types.
So no, yeah, totally open to whatever kind of metadata-ish things you think might be helpful,
Yeah.
And we may just have to find out as we start working with it.
Like where metadata plays a role.
So this is in the value flow spec, we've got intents and proposals to make up the listings on marketplaces. So the intents are all of the kind of low level economic events that you want to happen in terms of, you know, I give you this thing, you give me some money. Those are two separate intents. And the proposal is the kind of collection that groups them all and says these are all part of the same trade. So the proposal is the thing that you see, and you've got some intentions that are known that someone wants something to happen, but that's all you know when you see that stuff on a marketplace. So you don't yet know how should I respond to that in the marketplace, like, and what should I expect from the other person? You know, should I just respond by saying, yeah, I'd like to engage you in that, and wait for them to say, great, I accept it, and then I have to then probably say I accept it too, and now we're all kind of legally bound. Or, you know, are there ones where I can just say, yeah, I'm going to go and legally commit to making this trade happen immediately, and everything else doesn't matter. Yeah, those are both possible with REA, and but they do kind of change the expectations as to how the counterparty is going to behave. I was just trying to get at, I think that in most cases it's like the original creator of the listing is going to be the one who has to kind of action something to respond to it. And so in that action, they've got all the data they need to be able to say, basically, when I say yes to this trade, it says no to all these other trades that are coming in that are looking for the same offer. But yeah, it gets more nuanced than that, because it may be, you know, well, I was trying to buy 100 things and this person's offered me 50 and this other person's offered me 20, and I want to take them both and leave the order open.
Okay.
Like those, yeah,
you should be totally able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, value flows can do all that. I'm just coordinating it in terms of the people on top of value flows is maybe another level.
Yeah, I mean, I can see where the UI, you know, if you're thinking about a UI, there's a lot of ways to do it based on, you know, what kind of an offer it is, or what kind of a marketplace it is, or, you know, or whatever. It's so I feel a little bit like, which often happens these days, you know, we need a user group that knows what they want to do, right? And we, you know, sometimes maybe we're starting with some more specific UIs. Maybe it gets generalized later, or more configurable later, or you know. So if we are talking about Basin and Shiro and Seed Share, you know, we can look at those specific examples, or Alban, if you know, whoever kind of wants to participate, really.
Yeah, that makes sense. And thinking about what Basin are doing, theirs is probably more of the immediate commitment kind of flow, because they're working on a payment system where, you know, you're just paying bills. You don't want to have to say, I want to pay my bill, and wait for someone to say, yeah, you can pay your bill, before you can actually say, yes, I'll pay my bill, and then finally pay my bill.
Yeah, I think from
those
biodigester point of view, which is where Kamal kind of tends to say that it is that, you know, I've got 10,000 gallons that's ready, you know.
So those things might actually be at this stage like Basin specific DNAs that are built that use the Hollow REA framework internally, because they could just code that up to have an endpoint that says pay bill, that makes all of the events and stuff happen and sets up the relationships between.
Which is sort of how they mocked up their UI, actually.
Yeah. But I'm thinking, you know, down the track that might turn into either some kind of marketplace-like extensions in the Hollow REA DNAs that let you do, you know, accept sale, and it just makes those actions happen. But yeah, I agree that we probably want some idea of what the higher level patterns are before we go and build them into core stuff.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on how we would coordinate, like specifically matching across, like let's say I was to place an order across Shiro and Basin and Alban's community simultaneously? Like that's just the trader in me who's been thinking about that quite actively.
It's
And
not
let's say
yet in the.
I go offline in one, like, yeah, let's say I go offline.
Yeah, the going offline's where it gets difficult, because it doesn't work this way yet because of the need to translate categories of things between networks potentially. So at the moment, there's no real guarantee that a listing that you make in one network is going to have the same hash as a listing in another web network, because it might be translated when it gets replicated. Which means that then you need a field. I mean, we could potentially split listings up more in order to allow that hash to be predictable, but I don't know that it's worth it. Because the other thing that you could do is just have a field in an intent that says, created from, and it points to it, whichever the original intent was that replicated this thing in.
Yeah, I think
and if
possibly, I think they do have to know they're the same intent. And if it can't be done with the hash, we probably need some other, it's like, here's your order number, here's your invoice number, whatever.
Yeah, and I need
Here's
to
my
explore
order
the
number, and I'm referring to your, like people do this all the time now with completely separate systems, and it'd be great if we didn't have to. And we could use an identifier for a record that is the same record. It's just,
Wouldn't the hash,
from different places.
yeah, on that point, wouldn't the hash remain the same though?
So Glaspie's point is like, if people, and I'm not sure this is true, I think it would be much better if people could refer to the same set of like resource specifications and classifications and stuff like that, in one DNA over here, that everybody's agreed, that this set of trading partners or whatever has agreed on, that when I say part number XYZ, this is this little bolt that I mean, and it's exactly this one, right? And because those, I mean, you really do have to agree on that stuff. You can't just have your own definitions.
But you could have a community who doesn't need all the fields, right? Like they need not have a field for organic or not organic. Like all they care about is apples.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
there can be all, sure.
But it's just that if that's my originating DNA and then I go into, it's the other way that doesn't work, right? Like if I then don't have those fields, then that's the problem.
But this is like, this isn't about matching. This is more about like, I say I make an offer for, whether it's general, like I have a whole bunch of apples, or whether it's I, make these 10 parts for whatever. That offer, and I want to publish that into 3 marketplaces. So that goes to those 3 marketplaces. Those are probably separate DNAs. If in that other marketplace they're not looking at the same specification, or like if their apples is not the same record as my apples, it'll be a different hash.
But I think that's the element of centralization we bring in, right? Like with marketplaces, the generic app, like we also talk about the standard of specifications that people need to follow. And like there might be an overarching standard, and yes, like a community can say like, we don't need 50% of these nuances, and that's fine. But you do have to follow that, like that template, right? Like, and that could be a standard that goes along with the marketplace's app.
I think it's going to be not very easy to do it top down like that. It's going to be sort of this weird combination of these trading partners agreeing themselves, and hey, there's this great taxonomy over here. Let's everybody use that, except
Yeah. So can we maybe that's what we explore during the week? Like I'd love to get into it. Like we could actually take a couple of tangible examples and see how that can or cannot break down. But I think, but my sense is if we just bundle it with that decentralized generic app, like we could, and I don't, but I clearly, like I'm sure you've thought about this stuff way more than I have. So it'd be nice to see where this breaks.
you can't enforce homogeneity with it. Is the short version. It doesn't work.
That's probably true.
Well,
Like-
when they're not
like,
enforcing, but I
so-
think what you're saying is like, hey, like if you want to buy into this generic marketplaces vision, like the
yeah, sure.
like
But
this
it's
is
even
also part of it.
but it's even the issue of like okay, so let's try and find an ontology for all kinds of things that could be sold on all kinds of marketplaces. Like, it doesn't
Yeah,
really
it's not
exist.
going to happen.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's productontology.org where someone's tried to make an ontology just by scraping Wikipedia and looking at all the things on Wikipedia,
Wow.
but it's rough around the edges and it's vague,
Yeah.
and it doesn't, there's stuff in it that's America specific and all that kind of thing.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it gets even weirder with things like a meal or something, right? Like I want to offer them, like there's no commodification of that. Yeah.
And it's very domain specific. Like all of the folks doing agriculture, like they might be looking at agrovoc or I forget. There's like open ag. There's like a bunch of different semantic web vocabs around agriculture in particular, and it's really, we don't have the mental capacity to go into every problem domain and figure out what is the industry standard here that everyone uses. Like they need to kind of be doing that.
Yeah, but can we just send it along? It's like I made an offer for this thing that I found over on this particular taxonomy. Well, that's where you go and look,
Yeah.
Then you don't get into all these really, really thorny issues. It's like, or even if it's more than an offer, we've agreed and I'm sending you this thing, so there's a transfer.
Or you maybe also
agreed this is what it is and this is where that piece of data lives.
Maybe it's also up to the community organizers to figure it out. Like Shiro talks to Basin and says, this is how our fields map to one another.
That could certainly happen too. Yeah, people have to, work it out sometimes.
Sid, you opened, I guess if you had another thing before I maybe changed. Sid, you opened with this example of like trades or I think transactions in a local context somehow being visible to a bigger, whole market context, if I understood that correctly. And I wondered if, is there some like action that the community as a whole would take to do this translation, like from their, like to them, I don't know, they have like their local contextual view of what's going on, but in order for that to be understandable by the broad network, it has to be kind of translated into some representation that makes sense to the other, like we traded an apple in this community and we have to somehow say, this is an apple, communicate that to the rest of the network. So I wonder if, because in that sense, then it's not like quite a peer-to-peer topology or something. Like I don't really know quite what I think, but it's like instead of just bridging all of the little peer-to-peer bubbles, you're kind of like projecting things up and over and then like down or something.
Yeah, I haven't decided yet whether there should be a facility for a DNA to like automatically replicate everything that gets posted into it to other DNAs. Like there might be some particularly logistics networks that work that way. But yeah, I'm thinking of it as a user directed, like if I want to post something to network because I have a position within them and they're adjacent to the one I'm primarily interested in, sort of thing.
I think, boy, this is, there's so many new things here that we're just gonna have to try some of this stuff, work through it on the ground with a couple, 3 user groups.
But I also feel like this complexity is where that problem of homogeneity gets solved, right? Like this is fundamentally like how this is the key. Like if we want to be able to have more diversity in our commerce, like we need more marketplaces, distributed marketplace. If we want more distributed marketplace, we need to figure out how languages translate. And like, are we doing it with, I guess, the not so great way is to create this overarching language, but instead can we do it through these little bridges that get created within communities? And do we do that with a couple of examples? I think that's one approach. Do we do that with like creating one proposed way forward that people buy into? That could be another way forward. Maybe it's both. Yeah. Personally, I'd love to get into what we just discussed with you, Lynn, like if you're up for it. Like even for me to,
Sure.
Yeah. Like you said,
I mean, just to be clear, I'm like I don't have a ton of experience with marketplaces or exchange.
Yeah. But even if it's like a spreadsheet where even if it's a spreadsheet where we, take a sample of orders for apples and, work through what does it mean? Like, what are we saying to communities? Like, what is that ontology structure that is needed of sorts?
Sure. Possibly might have to help because I can't say that I understand all about how the different DNAs can be accessed,
Yeah, but maybe that's worth the conversation in the coming week. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And Michael, to your point, I think it's that tension, right? Like, I think it's not so much one meta and everything within it, but like possibly saying like just overlapping. And then the key is like the word that keeps coming to me is memetic bridges. So if we keep building strong memetic bridges between communities, you need lesser overarching structures, which is like the guiding philosophy of sorts. Yeah.
So if you wanted that, like, I don't know, not total market, total bazaar view, it wouldn't be some top down, it'd be like just a bunch of circuits.
Yeah, so but total bazaar view at my end, like this is all the commerce that I'm involved in, right? And that doesn't need an overarching structure, it just needs me to pull in whatever DNAs I'm part of. And so there is never going to be no one is ever going to be able to pull in like the overarching view of all commerce everywhere unless they pull in data from every citizen.
No, but there are groups with pretty firm membranes, a time bank or something. It's like there's members. These are the people that are, working with each other. There's a level of trust there because they're exchanging credits. It's a mutual credit thing, and so that also will exist.
Which is cool, right?
I mean, you still might want to see here. I'm in this time bank, and I'm in this other thing here. But
Yeah, but I'm saying time banks also map really well. Like ultimately, it's a unit of whatever commerce, in a way.
Oh,
it's
sure.
It's just measured in hours.
Totally. Yep.
Yeah. Cool. I feel complete. I also feel like I overspoke and interrupted a lot of people today. So apologies if I might have interrupted you, but I definitely feel very fulfilled with this conversation. Any closing thoughts? Or any closing comments?
Can I say a bit of closing comment?
Yeah, please.
And I just want to put a little bit of context to my speaking because I seem to like these conversations, so I'm probably going to come back again next week. So it becomes more clear when I talk. I come from a political activism background, and from a grassroots movement, we managed to win the capital city of as a political party, and we were very, very excited about what we're going to do because the intentions were very good, and we wanted to solve problems and make people's lives much better and all that. When we got to the government, then we realized that, oh shit, we don't have all these tools that we need to do something. It's like, and to start making these tools, we had legal obstacles, we had financial obstacles, People were not making good choices, you know, because they're not intentional, because of bad education and bad healthcare, and they're struggling and all that problem. So that's when we kind of realized that, okay, we need to have these tools so any movement, any group out there can actually have these tools. So this is pretty much the train of thought that I'm coming from. It's not necessarily centralizing it all the way to grassroots, to individuals, decentralizing it to that place. It would be nice, but my intention is to reduce this inequality from very centralized, at least local, to bring wealth to the local. You know, I think wealth is being extracted from these local communities, from all these different organizations. I think it's very important to create some tools that keeps the wealth within those communities. And that's what I keep talking about, this farmers app and all these other apps. And yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, right on. I mean,
I feel like you just grounded a very abstract conversation. Thank you.
yeah, really.
I do know you all, by the way, and I do know that we relate in this context very much. So it's not, I'm not here just ranting.
Thanks.
You've made me think of the folks from Freedom Co-op, who are one of the Value Flows user groups from a few years ago, and when they were going through all the Catalan, uprising and stuff that was happening in Spain, it was like people were sharing things on IPFS and all kinds of stuff just cobbled together to try and get data through. It was a real eye-opener as to how difficult it can be when all your stuff is on normal service providers and you find yourself in a politically awkward situation.
Very cool.
And there's just so much stuff we don't know how to, you know, like, you have to be ready to do it all, right? That's hard.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. And look forward to meeting you guys next week.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good week.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.